Okay, look guys, I know I promised I would never ever do a response video to Vaush ever again, but I just have to get this off my chest. Vaush made another fucking video where he debated a 15-year-old race realist and made a whole bunch of very bad arguments, and I'm gonna quickly run through all of them and quickly debunk all of them. I'm sorry, I know you guys are fucking sick of having me do response videos to this guy. I'm sick of it too, but I just can't help it, okay? I can't stop watching Vaush, and I can't fucking stop feeling the urge to make response videos to the stupid shit that he says. Okay, but here's the thing. Because this video isn't just about Vaush. A while back I made a response video to a video that Hunter Avalon made, where Hunter Avalon espoused a bunch of bullshit about race, and I debunked all of that shit. An Indian dude commented on my video, and basically gave a whole bunch of arguments for why he thought I was wrong about the issue. Now, in my back and forth conversation with this Indian guy, I promised him that I would make response videos addressing what he has to say. The problem is I never got around to it because I'm fucking lazy. So, here's what I'm gonna do. Because a lot of the arguments that this Indian guy made that I promised I would do a response video to are actually many of the same arguments that Vaush made in this latest video. So, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run through all of Vaush's retarded arguments, quickly debunk those, and then I'm gonna go back to the comment that this guy left, and I'm gonna debunk all of that he says that I didn't debunk in my response to Vaush. Because, you know, if somebody's gonna comment on my video and make genuinely good arguments against what I say, I feel I have to, you know, respond to them and take the time to think my response over. And besides, you know, this person was arguing in good faith. He wasn't like, you know, he wasn't like saying, "Oh, you're a racist." Yeah. Okay. So, in order to fulfill my promise to this commenter, I thought I'd take the time to go through these arguments. So let's start with the arguments that Vaush made. So the first main argument that he says is that there's no scientific evidence for or against the existence of biological differences in intelligence between racial groups. That is bullshit. David Piffer did a study in which he found that 9 genes that are associated with intelligence are more often found in Europeans and Asians than Africans and Latin Americans. Now, this study will be in the description if Vaush or the Indian guy that commented on my Hunter Avalon is wrong about race video is interested. So, yeah, there is scientific evidence for the existence of biological differences in intelligence between different races. Vaush is wrong about that. Second argument that fucking Vaush makes is basically this. You can't do twin studies, according to him, with regard to differences in IQ scores between certain racial groups are useless because you can't do a perfect twin study. You can't. If you're doing a study in which you take 2 black twins and raise one of them in a good environment and one in a middle class white family and one in a lower middle and one in a poor black family, and you try to set it up as best you can so that the only difference is the environment, then you can't get it perfectly right, because there's numerous factors that can't be accounted for. The problem with this argument is that it's based on the false premise that if you can't do a completely perfect study, then your study is invalid, which is absolute bullshit. If that's the case, then like all of science needs to be thrown out the window, because no study is absolutely 100% perfect. Like you're basically asking for freaking God to go down from the heavens and do the perfect study with absolutely zero flaws whatsoever. No, humans are humans, and we can't do studies that are 100% completely perfect. We can only do studies that are like really, really good. So that's the second argument that Vaush made. The third argument that Vaush made. Oh, okay, yeah, I have this written down. He thinks that the brain can't be subject to changes in genes as a result of evolution and the environment, because the brain is polygenetic and has multiple different genes affecting it. And the way he explained it was, you can have a genetic change to your eyes as a result of evolution, because your eye only has like one genetic gene influencing it, but your brain has multiple genetics influencing it, so it's, according to him, impossible that evolution can affect all of those genes. Except that's not true. If evolution can affect one gene, why can't it affect multiple genes? Like, I'm sorry, like how else am I supposed to respond to this? Like this should be like obviously true. This is like this is actually worse than the stuff Kraut and T said back in like 2016 or 2017. Back when the whole Kraut and T drama was happening. So no, multi-genetic things in your freaking body can still be influenced by evolution. Okay, the next argument. Oh, yes, yeah. This is, in my opinion, the worst argument that he made. According to Vaush, evolution that is caused by differences in environment can only affect parts of your body that are in contact with the environment. So your eyes can change as a result of the environment. The genes in your eyes, the genes that code for different eye colors, can change as the result of environments, because your eyes have contact with the outside world. But according to Vaush, your brain is inside your skull. And because your brain is inside your skull, the environment can't affect your brain or the genes that code for your brain. Look, I'm sorry that I have to freaking bore you guys with this shit. I know it's perfectly obvious to anyone with any common sense whatsoever that evolution affects freaking things inside your body that are in the interior of your body in addition to the exterior. Like, I honestly shouldn't have to explain this to people, but I'm gonna explain it to fucking Vaush anyway, because he doesn't seem to understand this. If you have an environment that selects for brain chemistry X, people who don't have brain chemistry X are going to be less likely to survive and reproduce. And people with brain chemistry X are going to be more likely to survive and reproduce, which means that in certain types of climates, in certain types of environments, you're going to have more people who are genetically predisposed to have brain chemistry X. And if the environment selects for brain chemistry Y, you're going to have people with brain chemistry Y pass on their genes to the next generation. Like, again, I honestly should not have to explain this. This should be blatantly obvious to everyone, including racial egalitarians. But, oh god. Okay, moving on. Okay. So there's this thing called the Flynn effect. And the Flynn effect is basically the effect... it's basically... Hold on. I have a freaking sore throat. Hold on. Basically, it's that the average IQ of a freaking person from like 1940 is going to be lower than the average IQ of a person from 2020 because of increases in nutrition and better education and shit like that. And according to him, this proves that IQ is influenced by environment, and therefore race realism is false. Problem is, that's only an argument against race realism if race realists were genetic determinists, which they are not. Most race realists, particularly within, like, Ryan of the alternative hypothesis community, in, like, the, like, HBD hard data science nerd community that people like Alt-Hype and Sean Last are a part of, most of them argue that IQ is 80% heritable. So the fact that IQ is influenced by environment and that our better environments are giving us better IQs is not an argument against genetic differences in IQ between the races. Okay, next fucking thing. Okay. Vaush claims that blacks have lower IQ scores in part because of factors within their environment that's lowering their IQ, and that could explain that explains a very large chunk of the black-white IQ gap. Here's the problem with this. Poor whites are... excuse me. Poor whites... If you look at the IQ scores, the average IQ scores of states such as Nebraska and places like that are overwhelmingly populated with poor white people, or white people who are living in rural areas who are, for the most part, working class, and yet they have IQ scores that are relatively similar to the average IQ score of the average white person. Which means that, yes, bad environments within the black community are contributing to the lower average IQ, and we should address those problems within the black community, but that's not really sufficient to explain the majority or even a significant minority of the black-white IQ gap. Okay, next fucking thing. Vaush claims that black people are implicitly or explicitly taught that they're going to do poorer on IQ tests because of systemic racism. Problem with this argument is that there's no evidence for this. There is absolutely no evidence that black people are taught through cultural osmosis that they're going to do poorer on tests. If you want the truth about the whole systemic racism shit, Uh, Sean Last has made multiple different videos talking about why Vaush's views on systemic racism are bullcrap. I'll link Sean Last's YouTube channel in the description. Okay, next fucking thing. He says that he says that there's no reason to believe that different races create different cultures. And so as a result, it doesn't really make sense to have cultural nationalism based on race. Well, let's think about this for a second. What are cultural sensibilities? Cultural sensibilities are ultimately the product of your brain. Now, if you're born into a given culture, yeah, you're going to be part of that given culture, but that culture originated out of people's brains. If you have a dish that has X ingredients and X ketchup, that came out of somebody's brain, which means that's influenced by their neurobiology. So we have to conclude then that fucking culture is a product of neurobiology, of neuroscience. So, yes, to some degree, culture is influenced by biology, aka race. Now, it's not completely influenced by that, but biology does play a significant part in culture. He also says that if race realism is true, it wouldn't change anything. No. If race realism is true, it would have very, very significant implications on government policy with regard to issues such as immigration, especially with regard to issues such as immigration. If race realism is true, it wouldn't make sense to... Hold on. It wouldn't make sense to mass import immigrants from Africa and the Middle East into Europe. It wouldn't make sense to the 1965 Immigration Act, which effectively flooded the U.S. with Latin American people, wouldn't make sense. Affirmative action also wouldn't make any sense. Because affirmative action is based on the premise that different disparities in life outcomes between certain groups are the product of racism, when race realism helps to poke holes in that. And in addition, the reason why race realism is significant is that it also pokes holes in the theories of people who think that systemic racism is the reason why there are differences in life outcomes between blacks and whites. So, no, race realism is very significant. Okay, next thing. Okay, this is my favorite argument. Okay. We get this argument, race realists like me get this argument a lot from people. So, I thought it would be fun I really want to debunk this argument because this argument trips up a lot of people. What people like Vaush will do is they'll make the correct argument that the differences biologically between different racial groups are very small. There's only a fraction percent of the difference between an African person and a European person, which is true. Like, that is completely true. I'm not going to dispute that at all. The problem is that the way people like Vaush word it makes it sound like that fraction of a difference between blacks and whites is insignificant. But here's the problem. That fraction of a percent difference is very significant. The fact that it's a very small difference does not make it insignificant. And if you want proof of this, just look at the genetic differences between humans and chimpanzees. Humans share at least about 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees. And yet, chimpanzees and humans are way different. Like, no person would argue that chimpanzees and humans are genetically the same. Like, no one would argue that. Not even the most brain-dead liberal would make that argument. And yet, there is also a fraction percent difference between blacks and whites. So if you believe that the small differences between Africans and Europeans are insignificant, you also have to believe that the differences between humans and chimpanzees aren't significant. So, next time you hear someone like Vaush say, oh, there's only a fraction percent difference between Africans and Europeans, don't let him trick you into thinking that it's insignificant with the way he words it. That fraction percent difference is small, but very significant. Okay. Alrighty. So now I'm going to finally address the comment that the Indian guy left behind in my Hunter Avalon is Wrong About Race video. Now, I've been wanting to address this guy for a long time because, you know, he argued in good faith. I figured, you know, when people comment on my videos saying, oh, you're stupid, oh, you're this, that, the other, I don't respond because, you know, I mean, you know, it's not a criticism, it's an insult. But this guy actually argued in good faith and actually made some good points. So I'm going to respond to what the Indian guy said in this video real quick. So, in my Hunter Avalon is Wrong About Race video, I made the argument of, well, if the races are biologically the same, why the hell did they develop so differently? Why did Europe advance so much, but Africa got left behind? His argument was, A, Africa didn't developed in the way that it did for a variety of very complex reasons, and B, not all parts of Africa developed poorly, and he points to Egypt, which built the pyramids, as well as, oh yeah, Ethiopia. He pointed to Egypt and Ethiopia as examples of this. Well, okay, first of all, the Egyptians, yes, they were Africans in the sense that they were on the African continent, but they were not biologically black. The Egyptians were not Africans in a biological sense. Genetically, the Egyptians were basically Middle Easterners. In fact, there's actually some studies that would indicate that the Egyptians are actually genetically closest to modern Anatolian or Armenian people rather than with black Africans. So the Egyptians were not black, and they should not be counted as an example of a African civilization that developed in the way that Europe did. Now, Ethiopia, ancient Ethiopia actually was a African civilization in a biological sense. But, of course, here's the problem. A lot of these ancient African societies, whether that be Ghana or the Mali Empire or Ethiopia or these other African kingdoms, some of them were rich. You know, there were, you know, if you take any history class, you'll learn about how they used to trade gold and silver and shit, and you'll learn about Mansa Musa, who converted to Islam and made a pilgrimage to Mecca and gave away shit tons of gold to random people, and then, of course, caused a fucking economic downturn as a result because the price of gold went down because too many people had it. But that's actually a story that I can talk about in some other videos. So there were prosperous African civilizations, and there were rich African kingdoms. The problem, though, is rich by what standard? Like, categories such as rich and poor are relative, and you have to compare them to other things. If I'm 7'1", I would be considered tall, but I'm only considered tall relative to the average person in the world. If I'm 7'1", but I live in a world where the average person is like 30 feet tall, then I'm no longer tall, I'm short relative to everybody else. And it's the same thing if I were like 2 feet tall. If I'm 2 feet tall, I'm considered short relative to the average person in this world. But if I'm 2 feet tall and everybody else is 1 foot tall, then I'm considered tall. It's the same thing with when we're talking about civilizations. You can talk about Mansa Musa and how he had all this gold and he gave it all away to the poor. You can talk about the ancient Ethiopians and these ancient African kingdoms. But if these African kingdoms were really as wealthy compared with European kingdoms and empires, as much as some people make them out to be, why during the scramble of Africa was Europe able to essentially waltz into Africa and divide it up? Like when I'll think of a historical example. When freaking Persia decided to invade Greece, it was a hell of a challenge for them. The Spartans held Thermopylae for 3 days, and the Themistocles basically kicked Persian ass at Salamis. And even if the Persians did win, it still would have been very tough for them to take Greece. But when the European empires decided to go into places such as Africa or the New World, it was like, okay, we're marching in with our muskets and we're freaking taking this land, and if Indian armies or African armies come charging at us with their spears and shields, we just form these formations and just shoot them. So, for the Persians, it was very difficult to take Greece, so much so that they never actually conquered Greece, which is, of course, good. But for these European empires, it was relatively easy for them to go into places such as Africa and the New World. They literally just waltzed in, engaged in a bunch of fairly easy victories against the Africans and Native Americans, and just took the land. Which is bad, don't get me wrong. I'm very much of the position that any form of imperialism is inherently unethical. But that's what happened. So, why weren't Africans technologically advanced enough to at least be somewhat able to withstand these invasions from European empires? And why wasn't that the case with the Native Americans, if there's this inherent equality to human beings that some people think there is? if African kingdoms were as rich as European kingdoms were. You know, if your kingdom's rich, over time you're eventually gonna go from freaking spears and clubs and shields to muskets, or at the very least, or at the very least, you're gonna freaking develop military formations to make your spears and shields better. But that didn't happen. Okay, moving on to the next thing that the guy said. Okay, so the second two arguments that this guy makes, that the guy in my comment section made. We're all descended from Africans, therefore we all have the same ancestry, therefore there are no biological differences between the races. Okay. Yes, genetic. If you believe the out of Africa theory, which most scientists do, then yeah, we're all biologically descended from people that lived in Africa. Now, it may not necessarily be black people per se, black people as in the African subspecies that we commonly call blacks today, but we were, if you believe the out of Africa theory, descended from people who lived in Africa. It may not have been people that are part of the African subspecies that we call blacks today, but we were definitely descended from people from Africa if the out of Africa theory is true. The problem is that there's such a thing as divergent evolution. So if you have like a freaking line of the human descendancy, yes, we all come from the same line, but there is such a thing as that line breaking up into multiple different lines and forming multiple different genetic ancestral paths. Otherwise, we would all be the same DNA-based life form. The reason why we have humans and chimpanzees and orangutans and different monkey-like species is because the lines broke off. Okay, so the second thing that he says is... Okay, so the next thing that he asked me in the comments section, and this is something that I should have clarified in the Hunter Avalon is Wrong About Race video. I made the argument in that video that human beings evolved in different environments over the course of their history, and these different environments very likely contributed to differences in biology, and the brain is subject to those differences. What I should have explained was how exactly these differences lead to intelligence. So let me explain that now, because the Indian guy in my comments section was confused about that, and I should have clarified that. If you're a European tribe in say Finland, every year there's this season called winter. And in wintertime, it gets super freaking cold to the point where it's very difficult to survive if you don't prepare for the winter. Which means that in order for tribes living in Finland in ancient times to survive, they would have had to prepare for the winter. Now, what kind of people were smart enough to prepare for the winter? Smarter people. Higher people with higher average IQs. and what kind of people didn't prepare for the winter and perished. People with lower average IQs. Therefore, the winter contributed to the development of Europeans having higher average IQs. Whereas people that are closer to the equator, such as Middle Easterners and Africans, didn't have to prepare for the winter. They could just, fiddle away in the summer because it was effectively always summer. And they didn't really have the same evolutionary pressure to select for higher average IQs than Europeans did. Now, this effect, if you want data on this, there's actually this effect that is observed in certain types of bugs. Certain types of bugs that live closer to the equator don't really have to build things in the same way that ants who live farther away from the equator do. Certain types of ants build these structures and kind of work efficiently as a team and build these like ant colonies and ant hills, and that requires some degree of construction, whereas other types of bugs who live closer to the equator don't. So if this effect is seen in bugs, then it logically follows that this also exists in humans. Okay, what's the next thing that he argued? Oh, he also questions whether or not human beings are subspecies, which is the argument that I made in this video. So, in human biology, there's such a thing as in biology generally, there's such a thing as human subspeciation, which is like a subcategory within a given species. So, like, there's wolves, or there's a better example would be bears. There's bears as one species, but then there's like brown bears and polar bears and black bears and panda bears and all these other bears. And these types of bears are different subspecies. Human beings, I argued in my Hunter Avalon response video, also have subspecies, but we don't call them subspecies, we call them races, because we just decided to do that. The Indian guy that commented doesn't think that human beings have subspecies. The problem is that, according to the standard definition of subspecies, human beings do qualify, or biological races do qualify. A subspecies, according to the source that I'm looking at, is a group within a species that has become somewhat physically and genetically different from the rest of the group. However, they are still similar enough to inbreed with the rest of the species. That meets, guess what? Human races do meet that definition. Human races are genetically distinct populations within humanity that are still genetically similar enough to breed with each other. So yes, human beings do meet the criteria for subspeciation. Alrighty, the next point that he makes is that brain size and brain capacity, or rather brain intelligence, the quality of the brains, are not the same. And so you can't use brain size as a measure of intelligence. Yes, that is true. Point taken. I should have known that before. Okay, next point. Okay, the next thing that he says is that the Minnesota study the Minnesota transracial adoption study can be interpreted in multiple ways. Not necessarily. The data clearly found that there were IQ differences between the or yeah, the study clearly found that the whites still had the higher average IQs, even when the blacks were raised in the good environments. And the fact that, now it is true that the people that did the Minnesota transracial adoption study said that there's no evidence that the differences in that study were genetic, but there are other studies that show, yes, it is fucking genetic, as I showed before with the David Piffer study. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to point, oh my gosh, I can't talk today. The next thing that this guy says is that IQ is very flawed as a measurement of intelligence. Okay. Yes, IQ is a very, very fucking shitty system, but it's the best we got. You know. Okay. If you're gonna... When evaluating how good a measurement is for intelligence, you can't just have some sort of magic, completely perfect system that it exists only in your imagination that completely measures intelligence with complete perfect accuracy and then compare that to IQ, because, you know, that's utopian thinking and we're not in a utopia. When evaluating if IQ is a good measurement of intelligence, you have to compare it to what's available. And right now, with our technology, IQ is the best measurement of intelligence. It's shit, but it's the best shit we got. Now, of course, being the best in a pile of crap doesn't make you good, but, you know, if the pile of crap is all you gotta pick from the best. So anyone who claims, oh, IQ isn't a good measure of intelligence, well, what's your alternative? Because unless you can invent some sort of magical device that perfectly measures intelligence, then IQ is the best we got. Alrighty, so the next freaking thing. He claimed, the person that commented under my video claims that race doesn't exist in a biological sense. I just disproved that with the subspecies example and with the David Piffer study and all the other studies that I cited in this video and the other video that I did in response to Vaush, and my Hunter Avalone is wrong about race video. And yeah, I think I've made a fairly good case that biological race does exist. And the final point that he made is that race and subspecies are not the same thing. The problem with this argument is that most scientists don't believe that race biologically doesn't exist, which I've proven to be wrong. So race, at least I think I've made a good case. Race and subspecies are the same thing. It's just that, of course, we humans, when Europeans started encountering different races, we decided, okay, we came up with this term called race, and it's like, okay, this is the black race, this is the Hispanic race, Native Americans, we're the whites, these are the Asians. But, of course, what we didn't know what we were doing at the time was actually categorizing subspecies. So, yes, race and subspecies are the same thing. It's just that for various historical reasons, we refer to different subspecies within humans as races, rather than subspecies. And I think I've made a pretty good case for that. Okay. That's the end of my long freaking rant. I think I've made a fairly good case that Vaush, people like Hunter Avalone, and people like the Indian guy that commented under my video are mistaken in their opinions. I don't think I'm gonna be doing any more race realist videos anytime soon. I'm kind of getting bored of this shit. And I've on between this video, the other Vaush video that I did, and the Hunter Avalon video, I think I've said everything that I've wanted to say about race. I think I made a pretty good case. So yeah, Mr. Indian Dude, if you're watching this, I hope you found this video helpful. Sorry that, like, this wasn't well scripted. Sorry that I was, like, cursing too much, you know. But thank you so much for making good arguments against what I said in the Hunter Avalon video. Please, if you... Please, I really appreciate the engagement and the fact that you actually gave arguments against what I said rather than just insulting me and calling me a fucking racist. Okay. But I don't think I'm gonna make any more race realist videos after this. I'm honestly tired of it. Okay. Okay. So if you like this long rant, okay, thanks for watching. If you like this video, agreed with anything that I said, or you want me to fucking torture myself by responding to more Vaush videos, which I hope I never have to do. Oh, one more thing. Look, I know I promised, as I said this before and I'll say it again, I know I promised in the last video that I did to Vaush that I'm never gonna make a fucking response video to Vaush ever again, but I just can't fucking help it. Vaush is so fucking stupid, and I just feel this intense need to correct all of the bullshit that he says, especially with regard to issues such as race realism. Okay. So, look. I hope I never have to do a response video to Vaush ever again, but if he says something stupid on his YouTube channel, or if you guys want me to make more videos responding to the crap that he says, just comment down below and tell me you want me to torture myself more. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video or agreed with anything that I said, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. This is Wolf, signing out.